signal me when to begin. We can start. Start na tayo.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Could I ask everybody to take a seat, please? Thank you for joining us here today. A very important topic on leveraging digital payment systems for social assistance. My name is Lisette Cipriano. I am a senior digital technology specialist here in the ADB. And my area of work is really looking at how we can leverage technology for progressing the financial inclusion agenda. So we have just an hour and 15, but we have an aggregation of wisdom here on the stage, and we'd love to hear their experiences and insights on this topic this morning. So really, what we will be discussing today is the role of digital payments and how it complements social assistance, social protection programs. We know that the expansion of inclusive digital financial services in tandem with digital and financial literacy for poor and vulnerable communities is critical for the effective delivery of social assistance. Several issues continue to affect social assistance delivery payment systems in the Asian Pacific region. Some of these include limited access to financial services. Usage is still an issue. Lack of digital infrastructure, including internet connectivity and mobile networks. Insufficient interoperability between relevant systems. Lack of digital ID, which we see in, which is pervasive in some of other countries. Shortage of trained staff to manage social assistance programs and payment systems. Digital literacy, a key enabler for our success in pushing forward financial inclusion and social protection initiatives. Inadequate monitoring and evaluation, as well as insufficient funding. So this session invites our experts to answer key questions such as what are the key constraints to expanding digital financial services in our region? What opportunities exist to digitize social assistance payment systems? And how should collaboration between the public and private sector look like in the delivery of social protection benefits? As mentioned, we have a wealth of wisdom on this stage today. We have here Dr. Mohammed Tahir Noor. He is the Additional Secretary of Benazir Income Support Program from Pakistan. Dr. Noor supervises the overall operations of BISP with a focus on dynamic registry, biometric payment systems, and robust monitoring and evaluation of various initiatives of the BISP. His portfolios at BISP encompass almost the entire operations of BISP, having annual financial outlay of approximately $1.6 billion US dollars, and catering for more than 9 million beneficiary families all across Pakistan. He has remained actively involved in beneficiary identification, data selection, data analysis, and designing of various initiatives like technical education and skills development and conditional cash transfer for education initiative of BISP. Dr. Tahir has a PhD in political science from University of Heidelberg, is well conversant with the issues of governance, human development, and poverty, and has been actively involved in post-PhD research on multidimensional issues like poverty, gender, rule of law, and empowerment of the poor. Quite impressive, sir. We have here next is Assistant Secretary, Special Assistant Secretary, Julius B. Gorospe. He is from the Department of Social Welfare and Development of the Philippines. Mr. Julius Gorospe is a highly accomplished technology leader with over 30 years of experience in the industry. He has a proven track record of delivering successful and complex projects in various countries, and he is known for his expertise in technology management, data operations, e-governance, and cybersecurity. Quite relevant in today's context where the digital economy is really expanding. We also have Miss Kathy. Hold on, my notes are missing. Miss Kathleen Delor Pavia. And she is from GCash, quite a giant in the Philippine marketplace in the financial services industry. Ms. Kathleen Delor Pavia is head for public sector and partnerships from GCash. She is a purpose-driven leader with more than 15 years of sales and marketing experience in Dell Communications and financial technology industries. She provides analytical and proactive approach in creating sales strategies to address industry needs and expand customer base. Kathleen collaborates to build diverse teams by leveraging on and coaching through the individual strengths of employees. And she has in-depth experience and insight from her experience in supporting the 4Ps program here in the Philippines, bringing with her the private sector lens in our discussion today. And lastly, we have Dr. Stephanie Deepaveen, and I hope I managed to pronounce your surname correctly. Stephanie is a senior research fellow at ODI, Overseas Development Institute, where she leads its Digital Societies initiative. She has more than a decade of experience in research on digital technologies, citizen-state relations, and governance. And she has a PhD in politics from the University of Cambridge and is also currently a research associate at Sydney Sussex College, University of Cambridge. So without further ado, I think I would like to invite our speakers to give a brief introduction of themselves, the work that they do, and really provide a short perspective on how they see digital payments and how this can be leveraged for social protection, looking at some of the challenges and some opportunities as well in this space. Over to you, Dr. Noor.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for the kind words you said about me. I work at BISP. BISP is basically the Benazir Income Support Program. It's a premium social protection agency of Pakistan. It's been working since last 15 years, and it has evolved significantly in terms of both targeting and payments. Targeting, we have achieved digital, or we can say we use technology in terms of targeting as well as in payments. Initial targeting was through a paper-based survey, and then we shifted to a CAPI computer-based survey, and now we have evolved into a dynamic registry. We have established a database of 35 million households. We have surveyed all across the country, and we have a data of around 63 variables on each household. The significant thing about this is that we have the GIS coordinates of each household of the country as well, where we surveyed. And with the help of those GIS coordinates, we become very instrumental in case of any shock or in case of any natural disasters, which happens quite often now in Pakistan. As happened last year, the floods, there were enormous, unprecedented floods in the country. And at that moment, this database was absolutely vital for the government for identifying the affected population in those affected areas, easy, swift identification, and then approaching to them and making relief efforts for them, and in terms of social protection, providing them cash, immediate cash, which BISP was used to provide with the help of that database identification, and because of the digital payment mechanism which we had developed, which we were adopted for normal beneficiaries. That was used for this in case of this disaster as well. Database, apart from database, in terms of payments, what we have done is that we have initially started with the money order system, where we used to send payments to the households through post office. But then we shifted to a different payments model, different mobile banking systems, and ATM, different cards. And now, finally, we have adopted a biometric verification system that the beneficiary, they can go to different point of sales or ATMs, and they can provide their biometrics, and they can receive their payments. So, and this has revolutionized the payments to the beneficiaries in terms of social protection as well as in case of any disaster. During last floods, in case of floods or in case of any natural disaster, it happens that the beneficiary, the usual social protection beneficiary might not be sufficient. It would not be sufficient to provide any assistance to them. The extent of disaster there would be lots of people who are not beneficiary of or not registered with your program for the benefits, but they are also affected. So how to approach them? The usual social protection beneficiaries, that is easy. But for the people who are not enrolled with your program as a beneficiary, to approach them quickly and to provide assistance to them which reaches to them, that is of fundamental importance. So that we have developed with our banking systems, we have various banking models, non-conventional banking payment systems, which increases which reduces the time for opening accounts without any formal KYC or anything. And we can open bulk accounts, which is, in terms of time saving, it is very vital, because if you have to open formal accounts, it will take a lot of time. In case of disaster, it's very difficult for the population or for the people to go and open accounts. So without their involvement, because of their database and because of that, this limited mandate accounts, we can open their bulk accounts and then can provide services to them and the financial support to them immediately. This was used in case of COVID. In COVID, we provided assistance to almost 15 million people, and more than 170 billion rupees were dispersed to those people in COVID days. That was all because of this digital payment mechanisms we had, and because of that database which we had along with the GIS coordinates. So these are the basic important things which we are doing, which are most relevant with the session we are talking about at the moment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nur. I think laying down the infrastructure, if I have the chance to circle back on the biometric solution that you're applying in the country, definitely go back to you on that. Mr. Gorospe, your turn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Still morning, sorry. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here to share with you some information about our departments and the programs that we do. My name again is Julius Gorospe, and I am an Assistant Secretary at the Department of Social Welfare and Development. I'm also serving as the CIO of the department. Just to provide some context, DSWD is the lead agency in the Philippines in terms of providing social protection services to our citizens. Our flagship program is called 4Ps, or the Pantawid Pamilya program, and we have an average of, we have about 4.4 million households registered under this program. Our beneficiaries receive payouts about 6 times a year, and the average payout is about 3.3 thousand pesos to 6.9 thousand pesos in each payout. That would depend on how many members of the household are enrolled in schools and attending schools. Of course, this is a conditional cash transfer program, so there are conditions that they have to comply regularly, to continue and to stay with the program. So the challenge is for our payouts, the payments, providing payments is always a challenge. Many of our beneficiaries who are out there in far-flung areas spend about 2 to 3 hours just to get to their nearest cash outlets. So some of them would have to travel across seas, have to ride boats to reach their nearest ATM. And usually when they go to their ATMs, the ATMs are out of cash. So that's a major problem. It takes them about 300 pesos on average to go to the nearest ATM. And in fact, the World Bank estimates around that Filipinos spend about 66 million pesos $66 million every year in total. Just for them to avail of these 4-piece benefits. So there are a lot of challenges there. Of course, recognizing this challenge, we see a lot of opportunities where we could innovate. Right now, there are emerging developments in digital public infrastructure, digital public good, and we are doing a lot of works or project developing digital public infrastructure for the Philippines. I mean, in the social protection sector. It would be great, it would be great. There will be a lot of opportunities that will come out once our national ID system is operational. As you know, our Philippine Statistics Authority is working very hard to sign up or register Filipinos. I think at this point they already have about 18 million people registered out of 120, 115 million Filipinos. So that's a substantial amount already. Of course, next, as soon as we have a lot of people covered, we need to see use cases. Parties, for example, such as DSWD, starting to use the ID. So we're looking forward to see that over the next weeks or months, hopefully, crossing our fingers. And there are exciting development also in the area of online, offline technologies. And as I mentioned earlier, most of our beneficiaries are in GIDA areas, or GIDA stands for geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas. Mostly these areas don't have electricity, they don't have internet connection. So for our social workers to go to those places, it's quite a challenge. And once they get there, of course, they need all the information tools, the tools that we are very familiar with, laptops and tablets and phones. So those tools would be more useful if they can connect, if they have access to the internet. They have access to data, timely information about our beneficiaries. I guess that's it for my introduction. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary Gorospe. I'll also circle back to the offline solutions because it's quite relevant to many of the people here, I would imagine. So we'll shift to a private sector participant, panelist, Ms. Kathleen Dolor-Pavia.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm Kathleen Pavia. I'm from GCash. I'm heading the Public Sector and Partnerships Group. So in case you're not familiar with GCash is an electronic money issuer that is regulated and registered under the Central Bank of the Philippines. But more than an e-wallet provider, we would like to present ourselves as a platform provider wherein we are able to consolidate different financial services to make financial services more accessible and convenient to all Filipinos. So definitely our vision for GCash is finance for all. And we see the opportunity when it comes to internet penetration, smartphone penetration, to serve the financial needs of Filipinos. So the Philippines is quite unique in its topography, having more than 7,000 islands here in the Philippines. So serving the financial needs of Filipinos on a physical approach is definitely a challenge, not just for traditional banks, but all financial institutions in general. So with the pandemic, wherein a lot of people were forced to really transact digitally to maintain and to isolate themselves in their homes, it provided a unique opportunity for the likes of GCash to really grow and be adopted. And what worked for us not really in preparation, but what we had in place even prior to pandemic primarily is our eKYC, our electronic Know Your Customer capabilities. So with that, during the pandemic, people can create their own accounts even at their homes. And this is when we saw a significant increase in the registration in our platform. With that, of course, we help the government in the distribution of its funds, primarily the SAP program. With that, they partnered with multiple financial institutions to help deliver those funds to different areas across the Philippines. With that, we also saw an increase in registration, and this is where we saw the importance of the role of the government in the creation of the accounts, especially for areas wherein it's not as accessible for them. And with that, even if we've seen some of the accounts inactive throughout the year, so we're now on the 3rd or 4th year since the pandemic started, we also see for those who continued using their accounts that they remain to increase the use case diversity they have within the GCash account. What that means is if before they were just using it to send money or to buy load, now they're also using it to pay online, pay bills, and even avail of other financial services such as loans, savings, or even insurance. And that's what we mean in GCash when we want to go beyond being an e-wallet provider, but even a means to provide other financial services and access and provide better access to Filipinos. So currently we have more than 80 million registered users already in our platform. And as we try to approach and tap more Filipinos coming from the rural areas, it also becomes challenging. It was mentioned earlier on the, of course, infrastructure, the availability of a valid ID that can be used to open an account. But beyond that, 2 other things that we are very keen on addressing as well would be the awareness and education on the features, benefits, and of course addressing security and fraud awareness across Filipinos so that they will be able to be more open at the very least in considering adopting digital payments. The last one will be on the ecosystem development. It was mentioned earlier by ASEC Julius on how it's difficult to withdraw funds. Yes, you can disburse digitally, but what happens after you disburse digitally? So now we're also conscious in creating a digital ecosystem to help provide use cases for beneficiaries to transact digitally and minimize the need to withdraw the funds. And this is something that we look forward to working with the government better in building those digital ecosystem for the consumers. Going beyond the consumers, we also see opportunities in working on an institutional level. I think there's a big opportunity to align processes and harmonize regulations that will allow government institutions to leverage on private financial institutions in the delivery of public and social service. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Definitely your perspective is going to be very useful for us because you're close to the client, to the beneficiaries, and you see their situation in where they are in their own situation and environment. But I'll circle back on that later. I would like to go to Stephanie now, who will also give us a brief introduction, the work they do, and also set the scene for us as we go into the Q&A later.
Thanks. So can you hear me? Is this position all right? Thanks. So I have the lucky role of, well, one, not having to be involved in implementation. So being able to comment on this and think about it as a researcher, which so it's still difficult, but I don't think it's difficult as some of what you have to all deal with. And I also have the lucky role to start by giving us a bit of a landscape view and background and how we might think through some of the various issues that have been raised by my co-panelists so far. So as Lizette indicated at the beginning, my background is thinking not necessarily just about social protection, but thinking from the perspective of digitalization and the use of data in public services. And well, as I think has been quite visible over the last couple of days, digitalization in financial services and in how we think about delivering social assistance seems pretty inevitable. How we do this is not necessarily as inevitable, and there's a lot of difficult questions to consider here about how we think about what the end goal is immediately in the longer term, how we work in partnership within government, and even how we sort of sequence and how we think about the infrastructure and other support that's required. So to set the scene, what I want to do is to start from some research that we did that was commissioned by the regional office for WFP here in the Asia Pacific that looked at these questions of digital payments around social protection from the view of the recipient. What's their experience so far, where we've seen a transition to digital, what are the preferences, and how might we think about the opportunities and also the challenges from the views of the people that are receiving the assistance. So next slide, please. And so what this research did was it framed questions of digital payments in the context of a wider question of financial inclusion and digital financial inclusion. So how does the provision of digital payments relate to people's savings behaviors, access to credit, how they sort of engage with payments. And this was research that I'm presenting on behalf of a wider team. It was led by Dr. Marisa Sarwar, who's with me at ODI, and also in partnership with researchers in 3 countries, Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Nepal, with also a lot of assistance from the WFP offices there as well. So I'm going to pull from this to try to draw out some questions about how we might think about what's going on, what are the challenges, and what are the challenges when we really think beyond just the programmatic views of efficiency to what is actually digital payments doing for the people who are receiving the assistance. So next slide. So again, I'm going to give a really brief regional overview. As I mentioned, I'm coming at this from the perspective of digital inclusion outcomes. I'm not really coming from the perspective of a regional or a social protection expert, and so I defer to my other colleagues for that. And then I'm going to really focus the most of my presentation, or this initial introduction, on what we found around some of the experiences of cash transfer recipients in terms of opportunities, and also what came out from this work around what the factors were that were affecting the relationship between digital payments and digital financial inclusion outcomes. So next slide. I'll skip this. This is Lizette already introduced them, the guiding questions. These are the ones I'm just going to speak to. Next slide. So regional picture. Again, I'm going to be quite brief on this because I want to give most of my time to user perspectives. But basically, just to say here too, is what we found was that among the countries that were reviewed in the study, on one side, almost all national governments have indicated financial inclusion and digital financial inclusion as a priority. At the same time, also very common is that we identified 41 government-led digital cash-based transfer programs. And by digital, I don't mean the whole process was digital, but in various different ways, we are seeing a movement to using delivery, often in the back end in the registration systems, but to different aspects of social protection assistance being delivered through digital means. At the same time, while we saw both of these, practically what was going on, the same of digital financial inclusion, we also saw that there was generally a low emphasis on financial inclusion outcomes within the social assistance programs. And there was also seemed to be a practical challenge in government between communication between the ministries and agencies working and thinking about financial inclusion, and the ministries and agencies thinking about delivery and implementation of social protection. Next slide. Not going to dwell on this, because it's not what I really want to talk about today, but I think otherwise just to mention that this picture of thinking about digital financial inclusion and its relationship to social protection involves other actors, especially in the region. International development and humanitarian actors have been quite critical in thinking around, in championing this, focus on digital financial inclusion, in thinking through pilot cases, developing the evidence base, and also the private sector has played a role. It's very difficult to think about how we move to digitalization without thinking about private sector actors as well, both in terms of the side of databases and also inside of distribution of assistance. So next slide. Okay. So this is what I want to focus on. So just quick background. What I'm going to speak about next in the last sort of 4.5 minutes comes from focus groups and interviews that were done by the partners in the research project in 3 countries around 3 programs, each with their own distinct dynamics. And what I want to do here is I'm not going to go into each specific country case and program case, but draw out some of the sort of overarching patterns that we saw and that were raised by the different cash recipients that we spoke with. So next slide. So what did we find in terms of opportunities and thinking not just about digital payments, but digitalized payments and moving to thinking about digital financial inclusion? So I think one important point to make here is just the basic fact that some of our respondents mostly women and older men and women, did report that this was an opportunity to get a first account with a formal financial institution, and that being a necessary first step. And while I'm going to go into challenges of where we go from this, I think this is something to recognize and in its own right is worth discussion about how valuable is this in and of itself. Also, in some cases, again, too, there's an emphasis on changes in waiting time, access, depending on the point of service, another question as we go into rural areas, but in some cases we saw reduced waiting time and access to a point of service. And we saw individual cases in which some reported additional savings. And in the case of Bangladesh, for example, we saw some using the anticipated Bcash transfer as credit with local shops to sort of help to smooth out daily consumption. The next slide. I'm not sure how much time I have left. I'm going to try and move quickly. On the other side, though, really, overall, we saw limited change going beyond this in terms of people's use, recipients' use of digital financial products and services. Payments were usually cashed out in 1 to 15 days. How people saved remained unchanged. And oftentimes, the way people accessed or obtained credit didn't really change. Often this was tied to as well, too. We saw that people only started to think about different behaviors once they had sufficient cash in hand for emergencies. They weren't thinking about mobile accounts or digital accounts as a basis for access to emergency financing. Next slide. So this is where I really want to try to emphasize why. What is getting in the way? What are some of the factors getting in the way of thinking about why digital payments don't necessarily automatically lead to digital financial inclusion? And while this might be sort of an obviously thing that it doesn't, I think it's worth sort of thinking through the different areas that came up among our respondents about what were the types of things that they saw got in the way of digital payments leading to increased digital financial inclusion and use of diverse digital financial products and services. And this is not comprehensive. I'm just going to pull out some examples from sort of 5 areas that seem quite key to think through, and some I think have already been touched on as well by my co-panelists. So the first is around thinking through what the digital mechanism is. What are we using for delivery? And we saw various sorts of barriers emphasized here. Some were tied to sort of the KYC requirements for access to the mechanism. Mentioned as well, too, the challenges around establishing a digital ID, also ensuring inclusion as well, and who has difficulty accessing it. We also saw, as another example, some hidden costs. So when it came to using, for example, the direct transfer, in some cases, the financial service provider waived the fees, but when they started to say, we're going to put in additional cash or use it beyond the immediate social assistance transfer, there were fees attached to it. So hidden costs that had to be borne by recipients that might limit their use. On the other side, as Kathy raised in thinking about the ecosystem, it ties into the second point here about digital and financial infrastructure being a challenge as well, too. In the areas we're looking at, there's one sort of thing about access in rural areas, but also sort of assumptions and what's at use in local communities, local shops, mobile points, vendors. Do they use digital cash? Oftentimes in the communities we looked at, they did not. Another key point here comes to sort of around the infrastructure is a question of choice. And does the digital and financial infrastructure enable choice to recipients and also to social protection providers and how they're working with different financial service providers and what people can sort of access? And here, interoperability. So between access to different financial products and services becomes quite important. And I think we can get into this later. I don't think necessarily working with one provider needs to prevent interoperability, but we need to think how it links up with different financial services and to what extent are individuals able to use the accounts that they have access through social protection for wider access. And there's questions here about regulation, financial infrastructure, incentives that can all get in the way of interoperability. And then finally, the last 3 points in there focus a bit more on challenges that were faced by individual recipients themselves. So one, I'm sure no surprise here, digital and financial literacy becomes all the more important as we think about not just use of the around the payment, but also thinking beyond it to using different financial products and services. Another question too is around local practices and norms, thinking about what are the conditions of the individual recipients if they're engaged in subsistence level enterprises. How do they perceive access to or who formal and digital financial services are for. Do they see them as being for them or not? And there are various norms around this that limited use. And then finally, a point I sort of want to emphasize is around this question of trust and mistrust. And if we're engaging with populations that tend to be the poorest in society, vulnerable in various different ways, what institutions are they accustomed to trusting, and who do they have reason to trust? And to what extent do they might trust formal banking and mobile systems for longer-term savings, but do they trust them in the case of an emergency? And that was one of the things that came out in our findings as a question to keep in mind when we're thinking about how this links up to conclusion. And so, final slide. So, just I guess to reflect on this as sort of a bit of a summary, we do see an opportunity here on digital payments to think about access to a first point of service. There's indications it can link up to different services, but these questions of how cannot be underestimated. And they have key questions that need to be thought through about partnerships and relationships within government, between government and financial service providers, and also with others in the local financial and economic ecosystems. And also thinking about investment. It's not just about investing in digital payments, it's investing in building trust, it's investing in digital literacy. And also, I'd argue, from my research perspective again, it requires an emphasis as well on evaluation. And are we evaluating these programs based on efficiency and programmatic outcomes, or are we taking into account and evaluating them based on how they intersect with the wider financial lives of the cash recipients? And so I'll stop there. I think I might have overspoke, but I'll hand back to Lizette. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you very much for that. I think what resonates with me there is really how do we build trust amongst our beneficiaries? Who would they trust in a situation where there is emergency? We did one pilot in the Philippines with a rural bank called Cantilan Bank. And in 2022, December, when a typhoon hit the province, the Mindanao area, Siargao Island, everything was down. There was no data connectivity, no electricity, no water, no anything. Because their core banking services sat in the cloud, they were able to restore their services relatively fast. Within 24 to 48 hours, they were able to switch on the services back again, while their competitors in the area, even the big commercial banks, weren't able to do so. They were only able to do that in a week or 2 weeks' time. So because of the trust that the people had in the community and with this Cantilan Bank, that really deepened their relationship between the community and the financial institutions, and now they're the go-to of the people in that area, in that province. And another thing that resonates with me is cash transfer doesn't stop with delivery, but really it flows into the next phase of people's journey in terms of how they're dealing with their finances, because this leads to economic independence at some point where they're able to save. And the last point is also on the user choice, which is really key. And this really segues well into my question for Assistant Secretary Gorospe, which is for us really to share your thoughts on how can we enable beneficiary freedom, let's say, or giving them the liberty to choose, and how they would access their funds. And is there a way where we can support and educate and help beneficiaries make more informed decisions in terms of their preferred access methods? And how can we enable, let's say, interoperability as we're talking about digital public infrastructure, ensuring that there is effective and equitable delivery of social assistance benefits? Quite a loaded question, perhaps, but I think quite relevant for the beneficiaries that we service.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I want to go home now. Yes, well, education, financial inclusion education on financial inclusion is a big part of our 4Ps program. In fact, we have a family development session, or FDS, that's conducted monthly, and it's one of the conditions for staying into the program, as I mentioned earlier. So financial inclusion literacy is part of that curriculum. But whether they have choice, as to what kind of payments, payment methods or outlets they would use, unfortunately, there's one. However, payments are being done digitally now for 4Ps. 100% of our beneficiaries receive their payouts using a cash card issued by our government bank. But as to whether they are using this account to to start saving money, I believe it's not allowed. It's not allowed. So they would have to open another account, or there has to be some special arrangement that need to be made for them to be able to start saving, using this account for savings. But based on our research, once they receive once they're notified of their payment, then they would, withdraw everything that's available on the account. So we have yet to see people to start saving, money. Which is understandable because, of course, these are, the bottom 40% of our Filipinos. There are, we're doing a lot of work on G2P infrastructure, and based on the G2P maturity model, this is on like level 2, one service to one mode of payment. The work that we're doing is we're trying to shoot for G2P4, which is we're trying to create an infrastructure wherein multiple programs of our department would use one infrastructure, and beneficiaries would have the choice on which outlets or payment outlets they would use to receive their payment. So we have a very ambitious target for that. In fact, we are looking to do we've started doing our pilots already in July, the first part of our pilot, and we're doing a second part towards the end of the year. So the pilot includes the use of our national ID, PhilSys ID, for authentication using biometric authentication, and then we're talking to several providers, including GCash, so hopefully to do as one of our options for payouts. So this infrastructure, once it's done, ideally would be used by all our programs, including 4Ps, our AICs, or the assistance to individuals in crisis situation. So yeah, what else do I have? Here, the bigger problem is creating an environment that would allow us, because of course our current banking regulation only allows one government bank to serve as depository for our agency. So at this point, we really don't, our hands are tied, so we don't really have much choices as to what avenues we could use for payments. And I believe this is stifling innovation in this space. So the government needs to relax a little bit on this, I think. Once it's done, then there's going to be a lot of participation from private sector. Another thing is there are some parts of the digital infrastructure that need to be developed, including an account mapper. So an account mapper is basically a system wherein the user could indicate which payment outlet he would use, so that when a payment comes in, the mapper automatically selects which account, and it would automatically goes to that selected outlet, whether it's a private bank or a government bank or an electronic wallet. And also there is a payment exchange here in the Philippines called InstaPay and BankNet, but they are private consortia. So I mean, for delivery of social protection services or payments for social protection services, personally I believe that there should be an exchange, a friction-free exchange, because fees charged by this consortia also can be could be used as payments, or it could be added to the benefits received by beneficiaries. This consortia charge something like 18 to 20 pesos, 20 pesos to 30 pesos per transaction. Based on our agency's index, a meal for our poor beneficiary is about 18 to 20 pesos. That's one meal. So if this consortia would charge 30 to 50 pesos, that's a meal and a half or 2 meals already. And then also, of course, our national ID. It needs to start showing successful use case already, because it's overdue. I mean, I understand that the pandemic crashed into their schedule, but at this point we really need to see a national ID working, and we need to see successful use cases. Fortunately, our department is working closely with the PhilSys ID and trying to help them develop use cases. So very soon we're going to see developments and actual use cases already. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary Gorospe. I think really, for me, the message there is really laying the foundations and really ensuring that there's infrastructure that supports the work that we do. A friction-free exchange, very important. Punitive transaction fees really don't move the needle, but we really need to find a way to support those at the bottom of the pyramid and how we can enable the disbursement of support to the beneficiaries. Potentially something, I'm sure that we are having already conversations on that with ADB and the DSWD. I'd like to move on to Kathleen and share her perspective as well on as a private sector operator, understanding the fact that obviously you do have a bottom line that you need to meet at every year. You are a commercial institution and you need to keep the lights on. But what are your thoughts on the strategies that can be employed by e-wallet providers such as GCash to facilitate the expansion or extension of social protection services or coverage to remote and underserved areas, understanding that, obviously we still need data connectivity, especially in the context of the Philippines, where you have over 7,000 islands, and how do you reach all of these people? Happy to hear your thoughts on that.
On our part, definitely we need to work around the limitations that we have being a digital financial provider. So with that, the first thing that we're trying to do, we have this program in GCash called GCash for the Nation. And one of the topics that we try to cover will be, it's called breaking barriers. It's basically understanding on an infrastructure and even regulatory perspective, what are the usual challenges in adoption. So with this, luckily on our side, one of our mother companies is Globe, which is a telecom company here in the Philippines. So we do work closely with them in cases wherein there are areas that would need enhancement when it comes to network coverage. But then again, at the end of the day, it's beyond our reach. But we just help facilitate discussions that will hopefully lead to the development of that infrastructure. And another thing that we're also keen on having, and this will already jump into the collaboration part, is also talking to regulatory entities that regulates, in that sense, the procurement and even the partnership between government and private institutions, and just trying to understand how can we work around your policies that, of course, understandably wants to mitigate risk, but at the same time, how can we lessen the friction or challenge in the partnership to enable a more accessible and more convenient way to deliver and access government services. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to address it as we go through the rural areas, having those conversations and inviting different private and even government institutions to be part of that webinar or seminars that we have. The second part is really on the awareness and education. So how we approach it, you're right, we have limited resources. While we have grown significantly in the past years, we are still limited in a sense to cover the whole Philippines. It's physically and even financially almost impossible for us to cover everything. So we are strategic in a sense that there's a deliberate attempt on our side to go to beyond the cities, beyond Metro Manila, beyond Metro Cebu, beyond Metro Davao, and even looking at other provinces and municipalities where we can educate and provide awareness when it comes to digital wallet or digital payment adoption. But we do need help from the government. So as we provide this financial literacy, one of the first things that we try to do is educate first the employees. It's hard to advocate digital payment adoption within a community or within a locality if there's already friction within the government itself. For example, a department, the finance department or the treasury department who's supposed to disburse the funds, if they don't have enough appreciation or if they don't have enough confidence in delivering the service digitally, then it's even harder to make the constituents understand, accept, and even recognize the benefits of receiving the financial assistance through digital means. So employees definitely, or the LGU, or the local government, or the government institution itself is very important to have that level of knowledge and acceptance. And then, of course, we go to the constituent members. And we do conduct different formats on how we do this. Of course, there's the classroom format, train-the-trainer types of format. But something that we found very effective is the one-on-one. So we try to have ambassadors, not just within the LGU, but in the communities that we try to engage. For example, the public market. So we have our one-on-one sessions with them to educate them about GCash as an example. And with that, they help spread the information, or they become the local advisors within their communities. If someone has a question or concern about GCash, they can help answer and address those concerns. Because at the end of the day, as much as we want to go digital, as we tap the rural or more far-flung areas, they still want that physical presence. They want that physical interaction with the financial institution in that sense. In this case, it can be through the empowerment of the community itself. And then lastly, I will again emphasize the ecosystem. As we go farther, we're in, maybe it's not more established yet, the digital payment acceptance, then we work with the local government as well in establishing and advocating digital payment acceptance within their locality. And this is where I see the Paleng QRPH program has helped. Maybe it hasn't really achieved its goal of promoting QR, the interoperable QR in itself, but in terms of promoting digital account ownership and digital payment transactions, we've seen that it has contributed definitely. So we see growth in transactions. We see growth even in the sustained usage of the wallet in that sense. So those type of programs that help financial institutions such as GCash to aggregate and even make the initiatives more programmatic in the approach and not just a tactical or one-time type of activity. It helps create that sustaining effect, so which I think very critical when it comes to, especially as we go to the rural areas. But of course, we're still mindful of creating the cash out points. At the end of the day, as much as we want to make everything digital, it's not yet possible at this point. So we know we need to create also that confidence and trust. The people need to, as what Stephanie mentioned earlier, I need to have that confidence that if and when I need physical money, I could have access to it. And at the same time, if I want to convert it again to a digital currency, then I can also have an easy access to do that. So with that, we have what we call GCash Pera outlets. So it's basically enabling the mom and pop stores, or here in the Philippines we call it sari-sari stores, to become those exact service providers. So they can facilitate conversion from cash to GCash or from GCash cashing it out as cash. So it becomes more accessible and more convenient as well to beneficiaries or Filipinos in general.
Thank you, Kathy. I think really it's important to have a combination of solutions. High touch, high tech, not necessarily high tech, low touch, because we are still dealing with people, obviously. And I like the idea of the literacy hubs really partnering with LGUs and developing advocates within those who are front of line. Talking about front of line in the case of natural disasters, and the climate issue is at the forefront of the discussion. Even us here at the Asian Development Bank, where we're looking to support governments in how to address the climate issue. How do we, Dr. Noor, turning to you, how do we enable quicker payments and for the extension of social protection benefits? What are some of the advances that have been achieved in this area in Pakistan? And if you could talk a little bit about some of the foundational work, you alluded to biometric earlier. What are some of the foundational building blocks of digital infrastructure that has enabled you to provide quicker response, effective response during crisis? I mean, you talked about the flood last year. Can you talk a little bit about that and what some of the learnings you can share with us here today?
Yes, of course. You see, in case of any disaster or calamity, time is of essence, of course. Because in normal circumstances, people are, of course, they are vulnerable, but they are surviving. But in case of any disaster, they have to be approached immediately, because they have to be provided assistance immediately, because otherwise their life might be at danger. So in quicker response can provide immediate relief to them. It can reduce their sufferings to an extent. It can inculcate some kind of economic stability because of the markets are functioning if there is immediate responses provided to them, and can inculcate resilience as well. So in terms of quicker response, what we have done is, as I was mentioning, the previous flood, the last year, we were the first one to respond. Within 10 days, BISP was able to disburse more than 70 billion rupees among 2.5 million worst affected people who were in Balochistan and Sindh province, in the far-flung areas who were completely inundated areas. So how it was possible? It was possible because of the data integration which we have. We have digital data, we have biometric, we have the GIS locations of our households because of the NSCR database which we have collected of 35 million households. And that was instrumental in not only for the government, Pakistan BISP, but for the government to identify to whom those services are to be provided. And then there is this financial inclusion because of the payments mechanisms which we have developed with the limited mandate accounts which we have opened. That was only for the beneficiaries, but since we had the data and the identity numbers of the entire population which was living in that area, we were able to open the accounts, immediately open the accounts of those people who were even not the beneficiary of the social protection program. For the case of flood relief, we were able to open their accounts immediately and provide them assistance. This is a special limited mandate account which requires not so complicated KYCs, which is a normal feature of a normal account. So because of that, we were able to open the accounts quickly. And through biometric verification system, we were able to ensure that the payment is reaching to the beneficiaries it is intended for. We enrolled their beneficiaries with the help of biometrics, and then whenever they get payment, they can get payment through biometric verification at the point of sale and at the ATMs. If ATMs are biometric enabled, they can get payments through ATMs. And if not, then they have the point of sale, which are almost in every union council, the basic administrative unit, there are points of sales available, normal, where they can get payments. In terms of the foundational blocks of digital infrastructure which we had at the moment in Pakistan, it's digital. I think the digital connectivity and broadband access, that is vital for any for any such activity to be successful. Because you can communicate fast, you can send data, the apps can be used in far-flung areas. In case of any natural disasters and these things, the communication is, at the times, communication get difficult. But with the help of this digital connectivity and broadband accessibility, we were able to communicate fast with the local administration, within our groups, within our different service providers, not only the BISP, but other government agencies which were functioning in the areas. And then the mobile networks, having efficient, good 4G, 5G services available, that is also absolutely vital. Because we had seen in the areas where there were difficulties in far-flung areas where their internet connectivity was not good, it was difficult to provide services to people. And there were delays, of course. As compared to areas where the connectivity was good, we were able to disperse amounts very quickly. The GIS, the geospatial technology, GIS, it is absolutely vital. Because of that, since we had the GIS data of our beneficiaries, we were able to identify them, not only the vulnerable population, but also whoever was affected in those areas. And then geotag data of BASP was instrumental. It is not only in these floods, whatever natural calamity has happened in Pakistan in the last 10, 15 years, this data was very useful in identifying the vulnerable population and then approaching them quickly. And the last thing, I think the important thing is having cybersecurity measures adopted at UP. Because once you use technology, there are elements, of course, which would try to exploit that. Because the population, generally, they are vulnerable, they are not very educated. So it is easy to swindle them and take benefit of their lack of information. So cyber security measures, we have a strong cyber security team at our place in BISP, which can have robust firewalls. They can identify intrusion quickly, and their incidents, if any such incidents happen, their response is very quick. So these are, I think, the few factors which were helpful in BASP and in Pakistan in terms of digital operations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noor. Thank you for highlighting that fact that cybersecurity is extremely important in the context of today. We don't want to be hijacked by bad actors, and while we're trying to build a big database that is geotagged and geomapped and gives us the ability and gives us the insight to identify where our beneficiaries are, we need to protect our data. And I imagine Assistant Secretary Gorospe has a big task at hand as well, being the CIO. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of cybersecurity? And I will digress a little bit, sorry. I'm going to go off script here.
Well, cybersecurity, actually, during our last National Management Development Conference, on my last slide, the title of my last slide was stuff or things that keep me awake at night, and cybersecurity is number one. So yeah, and maybe that's the reason why I don't have much sleep.
All right.
Yes, that's very important. In fact, in all of our projects now, we make sure that we employ privacy by design and security by design. So just to make sure that we make sure that it's part of our first phase in our development, systems development. So we have this shift left strategy to focus on cybersecurity, privacy, and quality assurance.
Right. Thank you for that. And I imagine that there is a lot of capacity building in this space as well, within your own, within the BISP and within the DSWD. I will move on to Stephanie, seeing as wearing the researcher hat and looking at multiple countries across the globe. You know, when formulating policies to enhance digital payment systems, not just for social protection, but for the financial services sector, because as you said earlier, that, you know, cash transfers actually through digital channels is the first step to getting financially included. What should be the foremost, you know, priority for government in terms of policy making? And second, how do you think government agencies can further strengthen coordination and collaboration? Just to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, they're not easy questions in thinking about what to prioritize. I mean, and I think this is probably a bit more even specific to social protection. But I think with government, I think there is an opportunity here mixed in with a challenge, and it's around thinking about digitalization in relation to exclusion, and especially exclusion of the most vulnerable and the poorest people in households. And I think social protection forces our attention on probably those who are likely to be excluded or have more difficult access to various digital services and therefore be not seen. So we think of biometrics, who are the people that are probably least likely to use biometrics, or their faces are not going to be recognized, or are unable to, like often people with disabilities, glasses. There's various different things that make it difficult for these systems to work. And often those things are very features of the populations we're trying to serve. And so social protection, because we start with vulnerable individuals, communities, and households, it offers us a way to think about what digitalization can do from the perspective of the least likely to benefit, if that makes sense or not too, and to sort of start with those tricky questions from the onset. So thinking about exclusion of who's not seen when we go online, but also then who's likely to be excluded or disadvantaged within the systems. And this also ties into, slight tangent, but ties into that question of thinking about sort of cybersecurity risks and who bears risks and what is our element of choice in making decisions about risks. And again, this is even more tricky with social protection, because if I'm getting a welfare payment, if I'm offered through digital means, and I sort of see that as the one way I get access to welfare payment, what's really my choice? Like, do I have a choice about digital or not, if that's the way it's coming? And so I think we need to think through, when you're dealing with vulnerable populations, what is the element of choice there? And the choice can't just be between two digital providers, but to be digital or not. And how do we think about that among populations that are already disadvantaged, disempowered, likely to sort of see their choices as being constrained? And to start there and to bring that into our planning about how we do this from the onset. So I think that's the opportunity here, is that we've seen a huge push to digitalization, development of digital public infrastructure, often moving like almost sort of full steam ahead without necessarily thinking about what's not seen, who's not represented in data, who can't be excluded, even if they're not the majority or the average citizen. So I think there's an opportunity for us here to sort of give pause and to help guide the development in a way that is much more inclusive. And I think for governments who are here to serve all citizens, that's key. And I think then there's an opportunity from that to work with the private sector to think about how do we reconcile a business case with serving all citizens, which are not going to align, because I can probably assure you that the most vulnerable poor citizen is not the best consumer for a company. But I think there is a case to work around this, and it's not easy, but I do think that is a starting point with government, to then take that into partnerships and to sort of think across about where they're coming, where's the common interest, where do the trade-offs need to be made, where is there not a business case, and trying to sort of work from there as a way to hopefully develop digital systems that are a bit more inclusive, recognizing these sort of trade-offs.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that insight. And certainly you've given a lot of us food for thought, you know, just really looking at who are the unseen, right? And, you know, how can we support them? I'm just going to pivot to Kathleen again, really focusing on collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. how should collaboration be between the public and private sectors? How should this look like, and how can we further strengthen this as both organizations or both sides work on harnessing technology so that we can really drive efficiency, transparency, and security in social assistance systems? Can you give us your thoughts on that and how we can deepen and further strengthen collaboration?
Maybe I'll start answering by saying that we do support the idea of having multiple financial service providers and giving the choice to beneficiaries. Because as much as I want to serve all the beneficiaries of DSWD or all Filipinos, again, we acknowledge that there are limitations. So we do support that push for choice and for multiple providers. But there is a deliberate attempt on our side to also, again, serve not just the metro where it's, to your point, profitable. So on our side, it's not even a question on we need to generate income, at least on my cluster, and on the public sector side. It's not about generating income. It's about how do we make it sustainable. I cannot go to my finance and say, I want to do this, and the bottom line will be always negative. At the very least, I need to propose something, an activity, a program that will be zero at the bare minimum, if not positive. So that sustainability will now bring me to my point, I get that in terms of an opportunity working with public and private sectors, that can there be incentives if we were to put more resources in tapping into the rural or far-flung areas. An example of this that we're doing right now, I mentioned earlier the Paleng QRPH, wherein the QR push is actually still a P2P type of transaction, person-to-person type of transaction. And we don't earn anything from a person-to-person transaction. But there is great resources provided to launch, to support the financial literacy on ground, the one-on-one engagements. So there's definitely financial and manpower resources to do that. And as much as we want to continuously do that, it will also be limiting for us to do that across the Philippines. So how can we in the public sector come up with an agreement, could be an incentive, could be anything, to help, again, make our efforts more sustainable? On the other side, I think another way that we can work better together will be a more regular and continuous discussion and consultation. For GCash as an example, a lot of consumers are already familiar with GCash. Again, with the 80 million registered users, knowledge of GCash as a consumer, as an individual is there. But in terms of understanding how GCash works on an institutional level that can serve institutional requirements, I think there's opportunity to better understand what our capabilities are, how we are set up. And by doing that, we can also hopefully better, again, align regulatory requirements that will help still mitigate risk, but then again, not restrict the partnership between government and private financial institutions to deliver the services. And that's on the regulatory side. And then on the solutioning side, by understanding better our capabilities as well as our limitations, then hopefully we can also work together in the design of a program. As much as, again, we would like to resolve all problems, we do recognize that because of our technical limitations, or scope of our technical capabilities right now, we also cannot answer all 100. But what can we do together in the program and solution delivery that will help at least maybe resolve half, if not more, of that list?
Amazing, great answer. Thanks, Catherine. I think continued and deeper collaboration and discussion and dialogue is really key and important. I think there's opportunity there for really looking at sector-specific or programs or areas where government and the private sector can collaborate, looking at human-centric design and solutioning. There you go. Wow, that was a big word for me. So We have come to the end of our question and answer. We are now going to take some questions from the floor. We actually have somebody from participating online virtually has a question for Asek Gorospe. You're very popular. The question is, what are the current barriers to government interoperability in digital-based delivery of social services? This is a question from Ms. Maria Bailon.
Barrier, I think it's digital transformation. It hasn't reached the heads of many people in government yet. So, I mean, of course, digital transformation, for digital transformation to succeed, it has to happen here first, right? No matter what technologies we put out there, those technologies would be useless if the users are not ready. They have not reached that maturity or that comfort level to actually use them. Another thing would be infrastructure for data exchange. It's not set up yet here in our country. For one, the agencies are not yet ready to open their data, their databases to us, and then of course the infrastructure to allow that exchange also is not there. Another thing also is the data sharing agreements. I've seen data sharing agreements languish in legal departments for like years and years, and some of them don't even come out. It's like a black hole. So those, I think, are the constraints.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question because I know everyone must be very hungry. Does anyone have a question here in the audience? No one? Yes, we have the gentleman here.
Yes, assistant. Hi everyone, I'm Greg Martel from OpenSPP, Open Source Social Protection Platform. So you were talking about opening data sharing agreements, and okay, I'm part of a team working on open source solutions. Is it something you are exploring, you are currently using? What is the current state of your adoption of open source, either in the Philippines or also in Pakistan for Mohammed?
That's for you.
I heard Pakistan, so I thought it's the question. It's not for me.
Both of you, yes.
Unfortunately, the focus of where we at right now as far as digital transformations and the development of G2P infrastructure, data exchange and data interoperability. Of course, interoperability is part of our digital transformation strategy, but it's interoperability among our systems first. We have hundreds of information systems in our department that are not talking at all to each other. So interoperability between those systems are on top of our priority. And we're also working with the bank to develop our interoperability infrastructure. I believe with the Department of Education and Department of Health. And thank you very much for the bank, to the bank for helping us in this area. We are looking forward to see the output of that. I mean, the results of that effort that has been going on for, I think, a year or two already. So in terms of the details, I am not very familiar with the details. I'm sorry, but I am aware that there's a lot of efforts going on, and they are ready to launch, I believe, very soon. Right? So thank you.
Data is knowledge, knowledge is power. Everyone wants to have power. That is common in every bureaucracy, every country. That is same in Pakistan as well. It is very difficult to persuade someone to share the data. And we have developed data sharing protocols. We are sharing data with different agencies, both provincial and federal level. In terms of different databases talking to each other, this is interoperability. That is an issue in Pakistan as well. various departments, various agencies, they have plethora of data, but it is difficult that those databases can talk to each other. We are trying for that. We are hoping that it would be achieved maybe in near future. But at the moment, what we have done, because the database which we have is, I think, one of the most strongest, most robust data which we have. 35 million household data covering 90% of the population, having their GIS coordinates of their households. So it is immense value, that this data is of immense value. So what we have done is that we have developed those private channels, secure channels, and APIs, where we can share data with anyone who is interested, and as well as ensuring the data. And in terms of open source, I didn't really get what do you mean by open source? I mean general open source, or it is something else?
General open source, but as well maybe DPGs, digital public goods, and so Lisette was talking about DPI, so this kind of solutions that are being developed particularly in the past few years.
Mm. Oh, I think it would be very difficult for any government agency to place their data or anything on open source. I don't see it happening in near future as well. Okay. But as far as our taking advantage of open source databases is concerned, that we do sometimes.
All right,
yeah.
I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think unless somebody in the panel would like to say something more, we are going to lunchtime, so I'm conscious that everyone must be very hungry now. I would like to thank my distinguished panelists, Dr. Noor, Asek Gorospe, Stephanie, Kathleen. Thank you so much for your candidness, for sharing some of the challenges and some of the pragmatic approach that you've taken in delivering social assistance, so your social protection programs to your citizens. And with that, thank you, and thank you so much for joining us and closing this session. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
We have got similar views about this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. That was great.
Good.
We have been
Very insightful.
programs.
I tried to know how to pitch it.
I didn't get to follow the script anymore.
No, it's fine. But it never does.